In 2020, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, hospitals were in desperate need of ventilators. There was a huge nationwide shortage of the life-saving machines, and hospitals all over the US were desperate to get their hands on them. One of these hospitals was Memorial Hospital in Colorado Springs. Now, while Memorial Hospital certainly had ventilators, some of them couldn't be used. It's because they were broken and could only be repaired by a manufacturer-approved technician. The parts and repair instructions just weren't available to anyone outside of the company. This is just one of many examples of something called planned obsolescence. And today, we're here to talk about planned obsolescence. We're going to answer 3 questions. What is planned obsolescence? Why should you care about it? And what can we do about it? So what exactly is planned obsolescence? The term planned obsolescence goes as far back as 1932 with Bernard London's pamphlet aptly named Ending the Depression Through Planned Obsolescence. The idea behind this plan was that the government would impose restrictions on companies, forcing them to produce shorter lasting products. As a result, consumers would be forced to purchase new products more often, stimulating the economy. However, the phrase didn't gain any real traction until 1954, when the industrial engineer Brooks Stevens defined it as instilling in the buyer the desire to own something a little newer, a little better, and a little sooner than necessary. And to this day, that's more or less what it means. It's the policy where companies plan the obsolescence of their products. It's generally seen as a practice where products are designed to not last as long or to not be relevant as long. There's 2 major types of planned obsolescence: physical obsolescence and perceived obsolescence. Physical obsolescence happens when a product is either not as functional as it once was or dysfunctional altogether. This can be achieved by producing lesser quality parts or making parts harder to find and replace when they do break. This can also be done through software updates on electronic devices, which slows them down as time goes on. And then there's perceived obsolescence. Perceived obsolescence happens when companies try to influence customers psychologically by making them feel that their current product is inferior in some way. This is something you see a lot in technology, automobiles, and fast fashion. At the end of the day, all of it is done to encourage consumers to buy newer products. One of the earliest and most infamous examples of planned obsolescence goes back to 1925. On December 23, 1924, a group of international businessmen met in Geneva. These businessmen all represented light bulb companies, and together they formed the Phoebus Cartel. By early 1925, the cartel had agreed that all of their light bulbs should last less than 1,000 hours. And while the cartel fell apart before the 1940s, the precedent for planned obsolescence had been set. Earlier in 1923, executives at General Motors had a similar plan. The American automotive industry was starting to become saturated and sales started dwindling. So GM executive Alfred P. Sloan Jr. decided that the best way to maintain sales was to introduce annual model year changes. In other words, every year the cars would change to convince buyers to buy new cars. The result of this was the 1923 Chevrolet, which is cited as one of the earliest examples of planned obsolescence. It was a car that was a brand new body built over 9-year-old technology. And since then, planned obsolescence has only gotten worse. Nearly every major automotive manufacturer has adopted it in some way, shape, or form. Nearly every major automotive manufacturer releases incremental upgrades to convince buyers to buy new cars. So why does planned obsolescence matter? Why is it something we should care about? While it's great for business, its effects are damaging to consumers. But perhaps more importantly are the effects on the environment. As time has gone on and consumers have started buying more things, people have started throwing more things away as a result. Especially with the advent of modern technology, what you see is a phenomenon called e-waste. According to the United Nations, anywhere between 20 and 50 million metric tons of e-waste are generated every year. Part of the reason why e-waste is such a big problem is because electronic devices contain a lot of toxic and hazardous materials. And because of planned obsolescence and how quickly they're being replaced, it's become the fastest growing segment of the municipal waste stream. Oftentimes, when e-waste is crushed and thrown into landfills, toxic substances such as lead and mercury will leach into the water supply, becoming a threat to both nature and to human health. At any rate, planned obsolescence is contributing significantly to hazardous waste and environmental damage. So what can we do about planned obsolescence? In order to solve the issue of planned obsolescence, change needs to happen at 2 distinct levels. one, at the consumer level, and two, at the corporate and government level. But before we dive into that, it's helpful to understand something called the circular economy. See, the economy has typically followed a linear model, where energy and raw materials are manufactured into products, which are sold, used, and then inevitably thrown away. The goal of the circular model is to minimize what goes into waste, recycling, refurbishing, or repurposing as much as possible. And while the circular economy model might not be practical today, the goal is that through economies of scale, this should be, theoretically, the most efficient and effective way of production. So let's talk about changes at the consumer level. In 1965, Ralph Nader published a book titled Unsafe at Any Speed, where he criticized the American automotive industry. Ironically enough, the target of his criticism was General Motors. While his work was mostly focused around automotive safety, it sparked a series of social and regulatory changes. For one, in 1966, the United States government passed the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act, along with the Highway Safety Act. And furthermore, the book sparked a consumer rights movement, which has since then expanded to include activism surrounding planned obsolescence. This activism has led to several recent social phenomena, including thrifting and, a particularly interesting example, repair cafes. While these originated from Amsterdam, thousands of these exist now, with the majority of them being located in Denmark and Germany. Repair cafes are, as the name implies, a cafe where people go to repair their broken items. These places are generally supported by volunteers who are willing to offer their time and expertise to help solve these problems. Examples of modern-day activism can be seen online as well. In a similar vein to Ralph Nader, there are entire celebrities whose platforms are built on discussions around planned obsolescence and right to repair. Societal changes like these have also led to changes at the corporate and government levels. Over the past few decades, there have been bipartisan efforts to combat planned obsolescence. As a matter of fact, in 2019, 20 states were considering right-to-repair bills, which would restrict manufacturers' abilities to restrict repairs on their devices. In Europe, government intervention has gone even further. Both Apple and Samsung have faced fines of 5 million euros each for slowing down their older devices through software updates. A study done on the European consumer market recommended several potential solutions, including tax incentives to repair and remanufacture devices, government support for repair cafes, as well as legislation that holds corporations liable for the products they produce. At the end of the day, planned obsolescence is a pretty big and complicated issue to tackle. The effects of planned obsolescence on the consumers and the environment are both pressing issues, and the most effective solutions are twofold. They must both address consumer awareness, and there must be incentives for companies to do their part. But one thing is clear, the long-term impacts of planned obsolescence could have far-reaching and massive effects, most of which likely won't be positive. So, there you have it. Thank you for listening to me talk, and I'll see you on the other side.